Welcome back to another episode of Casa De Confidence. Today, we have an incredible storyteller, and our storyteller today is going to share a little bit about his background and, a difficult conversation for some people to hear. So I do want to let the listeners that if you have anybody who may be a little bit triggered by difficult conversations, please make sure that you use caution in listening. However, I do believe that this is such a beautiful and incredible story of an individual that, again, set a life that has been resilient despite some of the challenges that he may have had in his life. I am excited to be able to get to know him better, learn his story as he shares it with both you and me, the audience. And again, let's welcome our friend Ricky Weir. Welcome, Ricky.
Hey, good afternoon, Julia. Thank you for having me. Really looking forward to this and having a conversation with you that hopefully your listeners will find engaging.
Well, I have to say, since the time that we first met, I was definitely moved by your story. And the name of your book, again, for the listeners, because we're going to talk about it, is Illegitimately Blessed. And it's my journey from being Black to white to me. And it is a very compelling name for the book, and it definitely draws my curiosity. Now I know a little bit of your story, but I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about how you began with a brush of almost non-existence.
Well, for the listeners, I come from an adopted background, Julie, and for reasons we may or may not touch on in the show, for pretty much the first 40 or so years of my life, I really didn't question my background in any sense. I had two wonderful adoptive parents, and I really shunned any questions that went beyond, who's your family, who's your parents, and there was some sort of rationales I had just as I was reaching, trying to get my dates right, reaching just about my 40th, where I had and maybe the triggers of some of what I've now eventually led me to writing the book, but recognizing at that stage where I'd came from and where I found myself, and it had kind of defied a lot of logic in terms of maybe how people may define themselves, and I would relate that to how society defined me during my early years, how even my parents prepared me, albeit with love and kindness, to expect things that actually never quite happened the way I was led to believe they would. and really, it was more of a cultural, I wanted to just I realized there was something inside me that was coming out, but I had kind of a lot of conundrums in my head in terms of, my upbringing, and was I almost being not loyal, because you do get that, you're not, you're meant to be acting like this, you're almost being, and so they had these things going on, and that triggered me to decide that I would find out a little bit more about my birth heritage. And I won't go through the whole story because that would take up the whole show. But kind of fast forwarding, I used a fantastic guy, or I stumbled upon a fantastic guy based in Edinburgh who helped me with the search. I knew that my birth father, I had very little details, Julie. I knew he was from Africa, I believe Nigeria. That was about as much as my adopted parents were told. And I knew my mother was Scottish. I also knew my birth father had died. I didn't know in what circumstances or when. That was it. And I didn't know a single thing. I didn't know his name. I didn't, there was a moment, and I talk about it in the book, when I was actually working in London and I was sat in a taxi cab outside the Nigerian embassy. And I remember thinking, gosh, even if they were the most helpful people in the world, and I would walk in there and say, hey, I had a Nigerian father and I'd like to trace him. And they, as I said, and they said, oh yeah, we can help, well, can you tell us his name? No.
You
Can you tell
couldn't.
us anything about them? No.
Mm.
So there's a principle there, again, in life, that I could have stopped there and went, forget it, it's impossible, what am I wasting my time? But it's about, I just took the first step that I could in front of me, and I thought, well, the only place I could start is to find my birth mother, who
Yep.
may be able to give me information. That was the only logical step I could take, and that's what prompted the call to Edinburgh, to the adoption service. And I ended up speaking to this great guy, Gary, who's since became, we still, and in fact, I met him about 3 weeks ago in Scotland and presented him with a copy of the book, because he's been intrinsic in helping unravel the story. And he got me in touch with my birth mother fairly quickly. And then I allowed that to flow for probably about 12 months without kind of pushing too much for additional information. I mean, long story short, Julie, the circumstance wasn't great. She was with a partner. He was already married. They had a brief fling, not even an affair, I would say, and she got pregnant. And now we're talking, the 1960s in Scotland. A white woman gets pregnant out of wedlock to a black man. I mean, you've got a better chance of winning the lottery than you would have that kind of combination happening, because there were literally hardly any black people in Scotland.
Wow.
I went through the first time I saw a black person in real life, I was 14, and I was driving in a bus in London, going with a football team going to Holland. That's just to give your audience a kind of perspective, of the chances of this happening. So after about a year, and there was issues with my mother, alcohol issues had been in the background. I wasn't quite sure how much they were still in the foreground. So it was the conversation was kind of just rotating. It wasn't really, nothing was moving forward. And I'd given it 12 months. So one day I said to my mother, any idea how old my father was? My birth, and she couldn't really say a direct answer. And she was kind of talking out loud, and she said, "Oh well, when he." She told me in the letter that he died and that he drowned, but he said nothing more than that. So I said, and she's talking out loud. She said, "Well, when this happened, when they found his body," and I'm like, "What do you mean?" And then she said a date. She went, "It was like July 1962," and I jumped in immediately and tried to correct her and say, "Surely you must mean July 1963. Reason being, I wasn't born until January 1963.
Okay.
So I'm then realizing I'd always believed he died sometime after I was born, not before I was born.
Wow.
So then I'm quickly doing the math. She's saying July 1962, and that he'd already been missing for a couple of months. So I'm already doing the maths, and then working back and saying, so he actually went missing just as you got pregnant. And she said yes. And I went, oh, wow. Okay. And then I just threw it out there and I said, so what do you think he'd done something? Was it a reaction to you being pregnant? Could he have committed suicide, for example? And she said, very honestly, I honestly could never say for sure. She said, but I really don't think so, because he was a very strong individual and he was making all the arrangements. And I said, what arrangements? And she said, he was making all the plans for me to have an abortion.
Wow.
So
Ricky,
in that moment,
wow.
And that's really where the blessed part of the book comes from, because before I was even in the world, I was blessed to be here, because until that moment, when you had that conversation, your father, it was always a kind of sympathy. Oh, that's such a shame, your father died. But the bottom line was, Julie, had he not died, I wouldn't have been born. And so that's the kind of brush that I talk about, the brush with non-existence that could easily have happened. And here I am, and there I was. But then I still was born with a label of society which was illegitimate, because I didn't have a proper mother and father. So that's where the basis of the title comes from. But the illegitimate is a moment in time as defined by society. The blessed part is everything that happened since. And that's what I really, both in telling my story and sharing it with other people, is don't wear the label you're given. And I would like to hope that through the book and what people I've shared with people is I've
Yeah.
not worn the label of being an illegitimate child, whatever
Well,
society deems that to be.
right. And, it's interesting how, no matter where we come from, society always is trying to put a label on us. And it is up to us to decide whether that label fits us or how we are going to relabel ourselves and really
Mm-hmm.
forge our own way. I would imagine that finding your birth mom and then finding the information she shared with you definitely had an emotional reaction for you. What was that like?
Um, to be honest, Julie, by that time I was quite, I was very grounded. Um, I had already kind of fallen upon what I would refer to as personal development, probably about 10 years before, more for business reasons than for anything else. So when I kind of started to reach out to find my birth parents, I knew it could be you never know what you were going to come across. You could come across complete rejection, because that can happen. People don't want to, bubble up stuff from the past and they want to just push it away.
Mm-hmm.
But I was really prepared for that if it came. That's not what came, actually. I mean, my birth mother and her family were delighted, I have to say, to have heard from me.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was having this conversation with my mother, there wasn't, yeah, I didn't come off the phone and break down. I just, and maybe it's just how I've been through my whole life. I just
Mm-hmm.
accepted it as it was,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and took the and again, I tended to have people around me that were more shocked and emotional than I was. Because I
Mm.
just kind of went, okay, wow, what a blessing. Whereas other people are seeing it as a tragedy, I was seeing it as a blessing, and that's perhaps something that I've not maybe realised that I've done with quite a bit of consistency, throughout my life. Even when not too dissimilar when my adopted parents first told me that I was adopted.
Mm-hmm.
And again, most people would expect a big emotional reaction. And I went, oh, okay then. And I listened, I took it in, and that
Mm-hmm.
was it. I never asked another question. And I wasn't holding questions back like I was desperate to ask. It
Right.
just, no, these were my parents. And they had, even at 4-year-old, I kind of sensed that they had taken a big chance on me, because they
Mm-hmm.
were, they were white and I was black. And so to do
Yeah.
that as of a choice. I mean, my mother had fallen on the situation because of her actions in
Mm-hmm.
getting involved with a black man, but my adopted parents had made a choice. And that was
Yeah.
a choice that was going to also be judged by society, but they had made that choice.
Mm-hmm. I often find that individuals that make a choice, like your adoptive parents did, really don't quite fully understand at times the whole scope of what is to come. And I know that you found some challenges throughout your upbringing. There were certainly a lot of blessings, but you found perhaps what you describe in the book a turbulent childhood. Will you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, childhood was difficult at times.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't ever subject to what I'd call, and I was never physically abused, and
Mm-hmm.
I feel blessed for that.
Yeah.
Not that that should be, I mean, people should think that's a God given right, and it is, and what I mean by that is, in terms of physical, I wasn't kind of, caught by a gang on my way home from school and beaten up, because I was black. So I didn't, and I know that many people faced those kind of situations. So that wasn't the kind of turbulent childhood that I faced, and God forbid that I didn't. It was just, you know being so different, and you were one of a kind, and at the time when you're very, influenceable as a child, you don't want to be one of a kind.
Yeah.
As
You
my
want to
life
fit
has
in.
grown, I've embraced being one of a kind.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
as a 7-year-old, when people are telling you, sod off, and it would have been stronger words than that. But for your show, I won't use necessarily the more aggressive words. But yeah, we don't want you effing N word to be playing with us.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so there's no doubt that hurts you at that time. But the platform that I found that helped me move beyond that was football. And for your depending where your viewers are listening in from, soccer in America, football in Europe, that became my platform.
Mm-hmm.
Once I realized I was I could play,
Mm-hmm.
and you weren't rejected. And it was one area of my life that I wasn't rejected. And therefore that became a big platform for me to build my confidence, to become part of a team.
Mm-hmm.
Because there was other areas that I wasn't welcome to be part of, not necessarily a team, but groups of children that might be doing
Right.
this or going here. And I wasn't felt to be welcome to be part of that. But on a football field, that gave me my throughput to build my self-esteem and to grow from there.
I always encourage individuals that have children that sports and other extracurricular activities tend to be such a great way for children to find themselves and to find a way to belong, because that's one of our greatest needs. And a lot of times we don't always feel like we fit in or we belong. But if we are then able to find these places where we can grow in skills and build some of the skills that we need for living and create, a sense of purpose for ourselves and really become good at something, it will raise our confidence. Now, you through soccer or football, you were a player, a coach, a manager, and president, benefactor, and that's how you live your life, empowering others. And this has been your platform. Tell me a little bit about what you hope to maybe through the work that you do. What is your hope for the people that you are helping, supporting, or giving a little bit of your story so they can learn from what you went through?
That could be, I guess, relevant to football, which, as you said, it's been a constant thread in my life. And I started a foundation in 2012 that is still growing. I say growing, still active. I don't say we're necessarily growing, but we're still having a growing impact. But we're not, we're never going to become a multi-billion-dollar charity or anything like that. But our impact is evolving. And one of the strongest facets that we've created in working with partnerships is formally teaching life skills through football. We've partnered with a Dutch organisation who created a fantastic program that takes coaches on a kind of 5-day workshop to teach them how to embrace life skills through football. And why do we work with coaches? Because that's where we can have the greatest impact, Julian. If we have 25 coaches in a room for 5 days, and each of those coaches is working with 100 players or 100 youth,
wow,
that's a potential impact, and that's what we want to. That's our motivation to reach that. And the reason for that is to understand and recognise, away from the TV screens and the superstars that we can watch and admire, there are literally millions of talented players that are never going to make a dollar playing football. And so we want to, it's not about taking people's dreams away. I would be the last person in the world to do that, because I've fulfilled many of my dreams. But it's to give people a reality check and a base. And when they themselves reach the realization that however good they may feel they are, it's not really in your hands to decide that you're going to be a footballer. That might sound like a strange, but it's not. There's so many things that are out of your hands that can determine that. Can you decide to be a scientist or an engineer? Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Go and do this, do this, do this, get the exact whatever. There's still blockages, of course, but you can have
Right.
more self-determination. But in general, with most sports, and I would say certainly the one I know best, football, it's not in your hands.
Yeah. Yeah.
It can rely on a certain coach at a certain time, can
Mm-hmm.
rely on the country you're in, the place you're
Yeah.
at, the means you've got to get all those things. So for me, it's crazy to put your eggs in a basket where you're
Yeah.
relying on so many other people. And sadly, and I've came across in our organisation has came across, there's people and organisations out there that actually try to take advantage of that vulnerability,
Mm-hmm.
that deep desire that some young players, men or women, boys or girls, think that a football career is the only way out of their situation, of their poverty. But then you can become very vulnerable, and there's people that prey on that vulnerability,
Mm-hmm.
which saddens me a lot. And again, I feel that some of our young players are the ones that we impact have been exposed to life skills, they're
Mm-hmm.
less likely to become vulnerable to those predators because you will
Yeah.
see the signs a mile away. It's
Mm-hmm.
only when you're blinded by, and sometimes it's even blinded by your coaches, by your parents, who themselves think, oh, our
Mm-hmm.
little Jimmy is a great talent, and this nice man has came to promise him the riches of the world,
Yeah.
you know, and they become blind to obvious signs of this isn't maybe such a nice man.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's something that, fortunately, I never felt vulnerable to because largely I was pretty much prepared to do anything to get a game of football when I was young.
Mm-hmm.
Because that was the place that was my go-to place, that was my happy place. So fortunately, no one that I stumbled across took advantage of that. I don't know how I would have dealt with it.
Mm-hmm.
But, because there has been a lot of horror stories, far more in Europe and in the United Kingdom than maybe the US, because soccer is a much newer sport. But certainly there's been some horror stories, about, coaches, pedophiles
Yeah.
taking
Yeah.
advantage of young players. So that's where I feel that our life skills
Yeah.
in football and getting them out to young people, not only is it going to give them a platform for life, it's not to say don't play football, but football may, as it has been for me, just a great hobby,
Right. Right.
you know. But to move it to becoming an occupation, very difficult.
Yeah,
But if
and
they
I think
have
that that's
skills,
something people don't realize. I think that, not to dissuade anybody from pursuing big dreams, but the the illusion sometimes that people have is that if I become that famous football player, or if I, have that career or whatever it might be, the tendency is to believe that our life will be fixed, that our life will be perfect. And yet, yes, there's a lot of benefits, and it could be that you have a successful career. You become this international, well known athlete, but ultimately, you have to do the work internally. You have to, live with yourself and learn about yourself and know that, you're not defined because of the title or because of the role that you have or the sport that you play. And that's some of the internal work that is incredibly important no matter where we are. Your life, you are a bridge builder in some ways with the work that you're doing. What drives you to do the work that you're doing now, Ricky?
um, it sounds very cliche to talk about, putting back, and so I won't use that particular word. It's a it's just a draw for me, Julie.
Mm-hmm.
I genuinely feel that. I mean, the football journey for many people, when I kind of ended my tenure as president of our association way back in 2012,
Mm-hmm.
for most people, that would be the end of what even then was I would look back proudly upon, in terms of my football career.
Mm-hmm.
I stepped 2012 was just before my 50th birthday.
Wow.
So that would have been, for many people, the time to just, put your feet up. And I
And yeah,
definitely had put
sit
back. I
back.
definitely had put back by then. I
Yep.
gave 6 years of my life as president on a voluntary basis. So that box was ticked. If that was ever why I was doing it, but I think that's why I can't put it in that box of the cliche just putting back, because otherwise I would have stopped. I would have put my feet up. I didn't have a plan.
Yep.
But I just put one foot in front of the other. And again, we probably don't have time to show, but the book talks about the story and the journey, how from literally asking my board of directors for permission
Mm-hmm.
to get some football kits that we were changing sponsors from Umbro to Nike. And so we had a whole load of football kits that were surplus to our requirements in the next, literally that summer. And I just asked permission to find a way of getting them to Africa.
Mm.
And they said, yes, go ahead. And again, I won't spoil the journey. And again, we don't have the time. But, that small seed of, okay, I now need to make this happen.
Yeah.
And by just putting one step in front of the other, I don't know, a year and 18 months later, I find myself getting on a plane to Nairobi. And the book starts with that plane journey.
Yeah.
So again, I'm not going to spoil the opening. But that then shares how the whole thing unfolded. And here we are, 12 years, 13 years later, where through that trip, definitely wasn't about putting back. It was just, I just felt this is where I'm needed. That first trip and the desire of people just to, of course, there's a desire for people to get something like a new kit, of course, as we all do. We all love small, whatever, but it was more the knowledge, and it was the knowledge I realized that I'd gained over 50 years in football that I now could share with people that were desperate to receive it. And here we are 13 years later. That's evolved to, the life skills and whatever, where I've always wanted it to be very simple on one hand, but impactful on the other, and not for grandiose reasons. And don't get me wrong, there was times in the early days where you present some team with a new set of football shirts and you feel, and how they feel and how you feel is great. But it's like materiality in a real life, Julie. It's short-lived.
Yeah.
And it creates dependency as well, because those people are hoping that the next time you come back, you're going to bring another set of football shirts. But when you come back the next time, you want to give that set of football shirts to someone else. And I've said to people, even if I filled a jumbo jet of football kits, 10 jumbo jets, I wouldn't even keep a microcosm of the population, even just in one African country, even satisfied.
Yeah.
But if I fill a room with 1,000 people and can share some of the life skills, knowledge, etc., that allow them to leave that room with a little bit more knowledge than when they started, that's with them for the rest of their life.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of that. I'm a big proponent. I think that, so many times we are disempowering people by not giving them the life skills. And really, I believe, and even through the podcast, right, we talk about so many different things. But really what I love to do is to have the listeners take something that they can actually implement. In essence, teaching individuals to fish rather than just giving them some of the things that, are not going to help them in the long run. And I believe that the work that you're doing is teaching people to fish so that they too can, move in their life and create the ripple effect for others as well, right? Because once we have these skills and we implement them for ourselves, we can't help but to be able to share that. And again, adversity is going to be a part of life, but if we have the right support, the right systems, and the right instruments to navigate it, then we can do it. I'm wondering for individuals, because I know that this is something that you went through, Ricky. You really struggle with racial identity, and we live in a world right now that we are creating more walls than bridges to each other. How can people who may be struggling with racial identity, right? Work at navigating some of the choppy waters because you've been there yourself?
I don't think there's, one size fits all.
Mm-hmm.
I do, without being here to just, and I'm certainly not, because clearly that my book takes people through the journey I've had,
Mm-hmm.
and but there are principles in there,
Mm-hmm.
and hopefully they're drawn out for readers. Because whilst on one hand we've chatted about, what I'm doing through football, to empower young people, what I really, truly, truly hope for, Julie, and it's still in its very much in its infancy, and is with the book of not only empowering, young aspiring footballers, shall we say, through the foundation. That's kind of quite
Mm-hmm.
specific, but inspiring anyone in life who has faced a challenge. And I really do feel I resonate with so many different sectors of society. And
Mm-hmm.
women, clearly I'm not a woman, and I'll never fully experience what women may face at times, but I do feel there's a lot of parallels in
Mm-hmm.
terms of things I faced in my life. I know you hear the proverbial, the glass ceilings that you hit,
Yeah.
where women feel that they were every bit as good as someone else, but the guy got the job, etc., etc. So if people kind of keep an open mind and draw parallels, then I definitely feel there are elements of my life that would and could relate to them.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's growing confidence in what you are and who you are. And so the essence of my story and journey, Julie, in terms of the racial identity is, and I do sort of speak to people about it today, because, in this day and age, it's, I had to become resilient.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was no go-to place. There was no sympathy place to go from. Oh, this person looked at me the wrong way or said a bad word to me, you know, and for good or bad, I'm not, those things are not right. Will they ever be right? Probably not. But I had to fit in some
Mm-hmm.
ways. I had to meet those challenges because there was no agency to go to that would look
Yeah.
after my case. There was not even a local group of which again also I feel helped me. The fact that, and I spoke earlier at 7 or 8, feeling isolated and one of a kind. But as I grew, as I reflect back, that was really an asset, because one of two things that could have happened. If I'd been part of growing up amongst an immigrant community, I may have been labelled with them, and
Right.
maybe have
Right.
faced further problems. But I was only one individual, so I was never really a threat to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And so I found my own ways of but yeah, did I, was there times in my childhood where I wished I was white? Yes,
Mm-hmm.
because that would have blended me in, and not had me facing some of these, ignorant
Yeah.
statements or whatever. But as I said, there was two or three, in fact, three specific examples, in my early life as I became an adult, where I was totally by chance been able to recognize my uniqueness.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not meant to be an arrogant statement, but having grown up with my father, my adopted dad, who was
Yeah.
white, had actually been born in South Africa, which is another little kind of quirk to the tale. But he was almost overprotective, and he saw things in a certain way. So he was always preparing, son, when you go into the big wide world, when you go into the big world, it's a white man's world.
Mm-hmm.
You're always going to be differentiated against, and if you're only as good as the next person, and he's a
Right.
white man, he'll get the job, he'll get the team select, he'll whatever. So until I was 14, this was from literally when I was 4 year old. I had
Mm-hmm.
this because that was how he drummed me into making sure I got a good education, because that was the only way I had a chance. And there was nothing wrong in that, sure. But there was, three things, and I'll try to be as quickly as possible, but in terms of dealing with that racial side and how your mindset can change. So one was a 14 football match in
Mm-hmm.
quite a rough part of the east end of Glasgow. And I'm playing in a cup final for my school side. And even before the game, you're, anyway, again, the details, I'll talk it through, but, we've played this game and I've played particularly well. However, it's the first time in my life, because there's, I don't know, 300 or 400 people at the game. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're used to playing in front of 6 or 7 people,
yeah,
that's 300 or
a lot.
400 people was a lot. And also, Julie, it was the first time that I'd experienced little, snidey remarks from a man and his dog at the side of the pitch about my colour, etc. And you're able to kind of just, phase that out and ignore it. But this was the first time in my life at this match I was facing chanting, from the largest part of this crowd about who I was, my colour, etc., etc. And had never been prepared for that. However, as I said, long story short, I played really well. We win the cup final. I've scored a couple of goals, but nevertheless, I'm in the car driving home after the game with my dad, and he can see that I'm visibly upset. I wasn't crying or anything, but just my whole demeanour was down. And I should have been up. We've just gone out. We've gone to a really tough place in Glasgow, and we've won this game. And he doesn't even ask me, "Oh, what's wrong?" He knows. And he says to me, "Son, if they weren't," and he said it in his broad Scottish, "if they weren't calling you names, it means you've had a stinker." Now, to translate that for you and your audience, Julie, that he basically was saying the only reason they were chanting obscenities towards you was because they had nothing else.
Yeah.
That was all they had left. Because on the field, you were killing them. Now, it wasn't given any label of personal development or anything, but in life, those few words turned, in many ways, big segments of my life around from that moment ever. Whenever I would go into a hostile environment, on or off the football field, because he was basically saying, I could go in with my head held high. And in fact, for the rest of my life in football, when I would go into a hostile situation, I would have a smile on my face. The more that the crowd would chant obscenities, the more inside, and this is where it comes to, it's that inside part, that inside belief in strength that you built. And my inside was going, you've already lost this game. You realise that. And that was a piece of genius, if you like, in terms of what I don't think he even realised himself how much of an impact that short statement made. But that has been with me for the rest of my life, and it's clearly it's a story I shall share. And the reason I share it because other people can do that same. They can make that same mindset change. Yeah. Because it's just a different route from the obscenities. So whatever someone may, whether it's an abusive partner or wherever that abuse is coming from, you can turn that around.
You can turn that around.
That's what I managed to do. Yeah. And that stood me, until this day, that stands me in good stead.
And it's the power of the mindset, Ricky. It really is the power of what you are thinking. And we have the power to really shift, whatever may be happening with how we choose to act, and because of the things that we believe. Excuse me. I could probably talk to you all day, but the book is fascinating. I think that the listeners are going to definitely be not only really lifted up by your story and inspired, because that self-awareness and unshakable resilience that you have as a parent. But this book is just not a memoir as well. It's a call, like you say, to arms for anyone who wants to be themselves. And I love how you use your life as an example for others. Now, where could people get the book? And I know that you have a gift for the listeners.
Well, anyone can get the book on Amazon.
Okay.
Just type in Ricky Weir and you'll find the book. There's a hard copy, which obviously I would recommend so that it lasts long. There's a paperback version and there's also a Kindle version.
Yeah.
So that's where readers can certainly access a copy. The gift I wanted to offer you, Julie, to your listeners is and I'm sure you can summarize it when you you reach them. But I'd like to offer up to 5 free copies of the
Oh my
book,
goodness, that's generous. Thank you so
which I
much.
will personally sign. And
Okay.
certainly, if I have the names of the individuals
Of course, we'll
and we'll
send
tell you how
those.
those 5 people can be just a moment, then I'll certainly personally sign a copy to them. I will mail it myself, either to
Okay.
your office for them. I don't know if they're around, or I'll mail them direct
Well,
to
we're
their
going to
home
figure
address.
it out. We're going to
We'll
make it
figure it
easy
out.
on the listeners and easy on you.
Yeah, and I've thrown in there's 5 multiple choice questions, so it's
Okay.
open to anyone, and it's just it's a little bit of fun as well. None of the questions in essence are very difficult. All the answers are in the book for sure,
Okay.
but they
Okay.
would
I
need
love
to
it.
read. But they would need to read the book very fast because it's the first 5 that come up with the 5 correct answers that would get the
Okay.
free book. So, some I certainly asked these questions to an audience back in November. None of whom had read the book, but the book was a prize, and it was by elimination. And in fact, I don't think anyone got past the second question without getting the answer
Really?
wrong.
Well, now I am
So it's a
intrigued.
little bit intriguing,
Yes.
and hopefully it'll bring a smile to listeners in terms of
Amazing.
answering the questions, and that's how I'd like to leave it. So hopefully those that aren't so lucky or aren't so
Okay.
quick off the mark will
Well,
choose to
listen,
purchase
we're
one for
gonna we're
themselves
gonna
anyway.
run this, and the listeners are gonna tune in, and we'll put this in the email so that we can, we can continue to stay connected with you. And thank you
I'd
again
be
for
happy to
sharing
do
the
so.
triumphs of your life and the inspiring story that this book has, and it has an incredible anchor of a story that I think people will resonate with because the story is powerful, it's universal, but it can be inspiring for others. So thank you for being here, Ricky. Where can people find you? How do they connect with you?
I am on LinkedIn. I'll be happy
Great.
to, and you can send it. I'll send it to you
Okay,
on the email. But the
great.
email you have for me,
Okay,
mail me at rickyweir.com. And for
okay,
anyone that wants to reach out to me because they've read the book, they'd like to read the book, or anything that that has inspired them in terms of uh, you know, what challenges you face. I'm not going to necessarily get into a whole kind of coaching scenario,
hmm
although part of my life has been as a life coach. I've kind of qualified as a life coach a long time ago, but I've never really done it professionally. But this is perhaps my tool for helping people to teach themselves. But I'm very open to hearing from people, and I will
great.
always respond. I can guarantee that.
Well, truly, truly thank you for your time, for your inspiring story, for your wisdom that you've shared with us today. And I know that someone needed to hear some of the words that you had and the inspiration that you shared. And again, I love that you came to uplift us and share what a powerful truth it is to go after your dreams and that things will come your way, but you have the power to move forward. So thank you, Ricky. And for you, my
Thank you.
listener, I appreciate you tuning in to this episode. And I want to encourage you to go and get the book. And we are going to have in the show notes, there's instructions on how you can participate in getting one of the free books from Ricky, a signed copy from the author. It's always a great thing, one of my favorite things. And it's such an incredibly generous offer and gift that he has for us. So, my friends, don't forget, go share this episode so that we can continue to share the wisdom that we all have in the power of our story. Until next time, don't forget, go confidently in the direction of your dreams. Thank you, Ricky.
Thank you.